Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm very happy to welcome you to today's event on PFAS, where we will be addressing challenges and solutions ahead. Currently, many PFAS-related legislative and non-legislative developments are taking place in the EU, as well as worldwide. So I think this is a very timely discussion in order to explore the various initiatives, but also the way that these may contribute to realizing the goals of the European Green Deal. So before we kick off today's discussion, I would like to take the opportunity to thank MEP Mr. Christophe Hansen for hosting this event under the umbrella of the European Parliament Intergroup. Mr. Christophe Hansen is, of course, a member of the European Parliament for the group of EPP, the European People's Party, and also co-chair of the Water Management Working Group of the European Parliament Intergroup. Unfortunately, unforeseen circumstances in the agenda of the MEP would not allow for his live presence today to deliver his intro remarks in person, but I'm very happy to let you know that we will soon screen a recorded intervention of Mr. Hansen. Very quickly, just prior to that, please allow me to highlight that during this event, we're equally looking forward to hearing from our audience as well. So I would like to invite participants to send us your questions. You can do this live during the event using the Q&As box of the platform, choosing the all panelists option. Just please, within your question, make sure to also note the speaker to whom your question would be most addressed so that we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. And once again, thank you very much for joining us today. And without further ado, let's find out more on PFAS from Mr. Hansen, who will be setting the scene with regards to today's discussion. Thank you very much to MEP Mr. Hansen for his video message intervention, and thanks a lot to my colleague Regine as well for her kind help in screening the message. I think that at this stage we're all very much looking forward to hearing more from the European Commission as well. So I'm very happy to introduce our speaker to follow, who is Ms. Valentina Bertato. Ms. Bertato is working as policy officer at the B2 unit on sustainable chemicals at DG Environment in the European Commission. And in her career, she has been dealing mainly with chemicals policy, first in DG Grow since 2017 in DG Environment as well. And she's currently focusing on REACH restrictions for environmental risks, including, of course, microplastics and PFAS, as well as on the international work on chemicals. So Ms. Bertato, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilyas, for the introduction. Thanks to MEP Hansen for hosting this event, and also thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to speak about the EU actions on PFAS. So we have known that PFAS were problematic substances for a very long time. So we had already started to restrict some of them in the EU under REACH and also internationally under the Stockholm Convention. However, we soon realized that these actions were not sufficient for two main reasons. There are still thousands of PFAS that can be used and then emitted to the environment during their full life cycle. And for the PFAS that were banned, they were replaced by substances that belong to the same class. So what was happening is what we call a regrettable substitution. In the meanwhile, scientists were asking to regulate the whole class of PFAS and not to continue restricting them one by one. So they were also saying that the alternatives were of concern. So in the European Commission, we were following the scientific work, and we also started to regulate some of the alternatives to the PFAS that were first banned. In the meanwhile, it's starting from 2009, the political pressure to act was growing. It was the Council first that in June 2019 adopted conclusions asking to restrict PFAS as a class, and to the Commission to develop an action plan to eliminate all non-essential uses of PFAS. And this is the first time that we hear this terminology, non-essential uses. This was followed again in the Council in December 2019 by an announcement, an important one from the Netherlands, that announced the intention to restrict the uses of all PFAS, so the whole family, in non-essential applications. At the level of the Commission, in December 2019, we had the adoption of the Green Deal, where we announced the zero pollution strategy for a toxin-free environment, and also we committed to address concern from very persistent chemicals. And indeed, PFAS are among the most persistent chemicals that we know. The Green Deal also announced the chemical strategy for sustainability, on which we started working. In between, there were events also happening at the European Parliament. In February 2020, we have the presentation of the movie Dark Waters, which is about a contamination with PFOA, a very well-known PFAS. And there was a very interesting debate in the European Parliament. While the Commission was working for the chemical strategy for sustainability, the European Parliament also adopted their opinion, and again there was a clear request for a phase out of PFAS in all non-essential uses, and also to accelerate the development of alternatives. Finally, in October 2020, the Commission published the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which included a detailed document on actions on PFAS. The strategy said that the PFAS required special attention, considering all the cases of contamination of soil, water, including drinking water, and the number of people that were affected because of the health concerns of many of these substances. And for this reason, the Commission committed to address this group of substances, aiming to the complete phase out of the use of PFAS, except where this use was proven to be essential for society. So this is the general and most important action we have on PFAS in the chemical strategy, but we have also other actions to which we commit. For example, we commit to define criteria for essential uses, which are going to be very important for the future restrictions on PFAS. Indeed, the PFAS are a very good example of uses that might not be considered essential, for example, uses in cosmetics, in ski waxes, in food contact materials, while they indeed have other uses that are potentially essential. For example, medical devices of uses that were mentioned also by MEP Hansen in his speech for photovoltaic panels. And these uses, indeed, they could be allowed at least until alternatives are available. Now, to go more specifically to what we are doing under the chemical legislation REACH, we asked ECHA to prepare a restriction dossier on firefighting foams that should be submitted to the ECHA scientific committees at the beginning of next year. And as it was also mentioned by MEP Hansen, there are 5 national authorities working to restrict all the other uses. These actions under REACH are actions at the source. So their objective, their key objective is to prevent the emissions of PFAS. But in any case, only using the chemical legislation to restrict PFAS is not sufficient, because these actions will take time. And as I said, we will need some exemptions for essential uses. And then we also need to deal with the contamination cases that are already there. Contamination of soil, contamination of water. So this is why in the PFAS action plan, which is part of the chemical strategy, we committed to use all legislative and non-legislative tools, not only the chemical legislation. And we want to address PFAS at all the life stages. So from manufacturing to use to the end of life. So I now mention some of these actions, not all of them, because it's all explained in any case in the PFAS action plan. But I will maybe focus on water, which is a key topic for the meeting of today. So as mentioned also by MEP Hansen, we already have a limit for PFAS in the Drinking Water Directive. And this is the first time that we see a limit on the wool group. And this needs to be transposed into national law by January 2023, and the Commission needs to develop technical guidances to be able to measure PFAS in drinking water. So there is still work to do, but this was a very important example of the way we wanted to address PFAS also in the other legislation. Still speaking about water, we are working also on surface and groundwater. Both directives are being revised, and the limits for PFAS are proposed. Again, one option which is on the table is to follow the example of the Drinking Water Directive and set a limit for the wool class. In my view, this is the right approach to PFAS, because we have some PFAS that started to be used recently, in the recent years following the first restrictions. These PFAS might not yet be in the water, but they might appear in the future. So if we limit the restrictions to a specific list of chemicals we find now, we might not be able to cover them. Another environmental compartment I would like to mention is soil. This is very important because many contamination of groundwater and drinking water, they started with soil pollution. Many PFAS are very mobile, and once they are released to the soil, they can move to the water. Some of the contamination cases also mentioned by MEP Hansen started on the soil. That was the case of Italy, but also a case of a very large contamination in Germany, and recently here in Belgium. So what happened very recently, I mean less than 2 weeks ago, was that the Commission adopted the soil strategy. The strategy speaks about preventing the release of emissions of hazardous substances into the soil, and it also mentions PFAS. The Commission will develop a soil health law, and as a part of the impact assessment for the soil health law, it will consider proposing legally binding provisions to identify contaminated sites and set up an inventory for these sites. This is very important for PFAS because I fear that we have identified only a very limited number of the contaminated sites we have in Europe. And then there will be the need to remediate the sites that pose a significant risk to human health and to the environment. And the deadline set by the Commission here is 2050. What is going to be important is that the polluter pays principle is applied, because remediating contamination of PFAS is very expensive. So I could go on for much longer speaking about PFAS. This is indeed one of my favorite dossiers, but I think that it is time to leave the floor to all the speakers that will follow for the panel discussion. I will stay connected. I will follow the meeting, including the Q&A sessions, and I will be able then to address any question that is asked to me. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bertato, for your keynote intervention, presenting us with a vision, but also the key work that the European Commission is undertaking with regards to PFAS. And now I'm very much delighted to present your 4 panelists to follow. So we have together with us Mr. Bjorn Hansen, Executive Director at ECHA. Hello, Mr. Hansen. Mr. Hansen is the Executive Director of ECHA, which of course stands for the European Chemicals Agency. And prior to that, Mr. Hansen joined the European Commission in 1991, working first at the European Chemicals Bureau at the JRC, and then in the Chemicals Unit of DG Environment as Head of Unit. We also have with us today Mr. Nicolas Robin, Director of the Fluoropolymers Products Group within Plastics Europe. Mr. Robin has great in-depth knowledge and experience in European and national policy-making process through a plethora of successful track records in advocacy and strategic communication campaigns. So good afternoon, Mr. Robin, as well. I'm very happy to introduce as well Dr. Claudia Castel-Exner, who is president of EURO, which stands for the European Federation of National Associations of Water Services, representing both drinking water but wastewater service providers from 29 countries. Ms. Castel-Exner is also the head of water management, water quality and water usage, and the director of European water policies at the German Technical and Scientific Association for Gas and Water in Bonn. And last but not least, I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Tatiana Santos, who is a policy manager for chemicals and nanotechnology at EEB, the European Environmental Bureau, where she works on EU chemicals legislation, including REACH. So Ms. Santos has been working in the areas of chemical risk issues, chemical legislations, occupational health and safety, but also chemicals in circular economy and substitution of hazardous chemicals for almost 20 years now. So it's a pleasure to have you all 4 with us today. Thank you very much for tuning in. To begin with, I would like to ask the first question to Mr. Bjorn Hansen from ECHA. Practically, why is it so important that we talk about PFAS today? And what is ECHA doing towards tackling this topic?
Thanks a lot, Elias, for the question, and thanks a lot for inviting me for this panel. And I look really forward to the Q&A, but also the discussion amongst the panelists and Valentina too. Great question to kick off with. I'll start with the second half. I'll start with why concern, basically what are we doing in ECHA? And then I'll say why it's important to talk about it. I think Valentina mapped out very nicely how policy and science has interacted in the history of looking at PFAS, and she's mapped out why policy has taken action. And simply for the reason that policy is interested in this group of chemicals and want action, we, of course, in the European Chemicals Agency, simply from that alone, have a duty to have a look at this in order to put objective science on the table in order to assess whether or not the policy action that is requested here is justifiable or not. On the other hand, also from our scientific and technical perspective, as Valentina mapped out, we have been airing our ideas, so have many others. We do see a concern that also from that alone justifies to have a look at what needs to be done in order to protect human health and the environment, but also, of course, looking at the other objectives that REACH sets out. And there, the big commonality with PFAS is it's very persistent, that Valentina already mapped out. And scientifically, if you got something that's extremely persistent, you emit it into the environment, it'll stay around for a very long time. And we know it's very difficult to clean up afterwards. That's what MEP Hansen was talking about, the 2 examples. Valentina has talked about that, very difficult. And that's basically the ingredients for concern. Many other chemicals, if you cut emissions, they will degrade, and thereby the problem will disappear by cutting off emissions. That doesn't happen here because the PFAS will stay around. Now, on top of that, when you start looking at it, there's a lot of toxicities and other concern areas, depending on which group of PFAS you look at. So this stretches from mobility in soil and water, to toxicities, to bioaccumulation, to various long-range transport opportunities or possibilities. So basically, as a class, just from that alone, we would say, yeah, there's a good reason to have a close look at these substances and where necessary to act. As Valentina mentioned, we're involved also with the member states in preparing the restrictions dossier all across the board of PFAS, but in February, we will be testing our input to the member states restriction for the specific case of firefighting foams, where we're looking at all the PFAS chemistries and coming with a proposal on how to restrict them for that use. But in a sense, that's a test case for the real big restriction prepared mainly by the member states with our support on the grouping. And ultimately, of course, it's the Risk Assessment Committee and the Socioeconomic Analysis Committee that will judge whether those trying to prepare a scientific sound dossier actually will be scientifically sound and the recommendations followed. Now, why do we need to talk about it? That's basically a two-liner. In order to do our work well, we of course need transparency, but we need input so that we can answer as many questions that there might be en route, so that once we're finished with our work, it's a solid piece of science with all inputs possible, where all questions that were there en route have been answered. And that's the best foundation for policy to take a decision. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen, for your remarks. And we've heard a lot about Mr. Hansen's concerns on PFAS. So I would like to take the opportunity to turn to Mr. Nicolas Robin. And Mr. Robin, could you please take us through how is the plastics industry reacting to the growing global concerns regarding PFAS, and what are perhaps the main drivers and factors for you?
Yeah, thank you, Elias. Obviously, as you mentioned, I'm the director for the fluoropolymer product group in Plastic Europe. So as such, I'm glad to comment on fluoropolymer, but I'm not placed to comment on how all PFAS substances may or may not impact environmental human health. And this is important because I heard the Mr. MEP, I heard the Commission, I heard the ECHA, and they're all talking about grouping. And obviously, as an industry, we recognize the concern around PFAS substance. But as a fluoropolymer manufacturer, we believe that any regulation put in place should be first proportionate and need to be science-based. So I'm glad that ECHA agree with me on that one. But secondly, we consider that the specificity and differentiation of fluoropolymer substance from the wide PFAS group. So we don't believe that grouping all PFAS in one big bucket is scientifically based. I will discuss later on the fluoropolymer as specific physical and chemical property would differ them from other PFASs. Therefore, probably it will need it to have subgrouping eventually of PFASs. And why I'm saying that? Because most of the fluoropolymer have been demonstrated to meet the OECD criteria of polymer of low concern. They don't have present significant toxicity concern. They cannot degrade into other PFASs under normal condition use. So as I said, they're very different than other PFASs. And the second point is obviously fluoropolymer, as also in introduction the MEP said, I mean, the fluoropolymer have unique property and they cannot be obtainable with other polymer. And so they are definitely irreplaceable. I don't know if they are essential, but they're definitely irreplaceable to achieve actually the ambitious EU Green Deal target, the digitalization of the European economy. So the economy needs this advanced polymer, such fluoropolymer, in very cutting edge industry. I mean, you cannot do semiconductor without fluoropolymer. We are using renewable energy installation as we discussed. We are using low emission transport technology. We are using surgical implementable devices. And of course, we are using lithium and hydrogen battery. So as I'm discussing hydrogen battery, obviously one of big example is without fluoropolymer, goals of the European Battery Alliance and the strategic action for battery will not be possible. Today, in a majority of use case of fluoropolymer, they have no reliable alternative combining the unique property of fluoropolymer. And when eventually they have different alternatives, they don't have the same set of property. And when we're talking about medical device, when we're talking about transportation, when we're talking about satellite, when we're talking a lot of application, you have to know also they have different standards, different safety standards. And to be able to apply this safety standard, you need fluoropolymer. And actually, in terms of legislation, the independent consultancy Kim Service has recently developed a regulatory management option analysis for fluoropolymer. And the conclusion of that was the best risk management option is a combination of risk restriction derogating for fluoropolymer, as I explained why previously, completed by a voluntary initiative in terms of responsible management to ensure and to address the stakeholder concern, and a review of the EU waste policy. And for us, this option will be proportionate, will consider the specificity and the differentiation of fluoropolymer from the wide group of PFAS. And I will be happy maybe later in the discussion to present what the industry is doing in terms of responsible manufacturing. We discussed already, as I said, with the polymer of low concern, the use phase, and we can obviously discuss also the end of life and water later in the discussion. Thank you, Elias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robin. And on this note, I would like to turn to Dr. Kastel-Exner to ask you, why are PFAS an important issue for the water sector, and what is Euro's position about that?
Thank you very much, Elias. Thank you very much too, that you set up this workshop on this very, very complex issue with quite a huge spectrum of different perspectives. And now I would like really to take the opportunity, together with you to have a look at the perspective of the drinking water operators and wastewater operators. And we are more or less at the very, very end of that chain. And in order to fulfill really important tasks. So to deliver and provide safe, wholesome, and clean drinking water for you every day at the tap, and also to treat the wastewater. Of course, PFAS, they are very, very widely present. And from our point of view, what is really, really important is to have a look at the substance properties. As we said, they are not only persistent, toxic, bioaccumulative, they are also mobile. And this is exactly an issue for us, because we can say quite frankly, the more mobile a substance is, the more likely is it, and the more sooner the case is that the substance enter the water cycle, and we find it in drinking water resources. There are, and VP Hansen mentioned it, there are of course some really, really big cases, environmental damages. And when it especially comes to drinking water resources, there are a couple of cases with firefighting exercises with the use of firefighting foams in drinking water catchment areas, which really are of great concern. And also cases when using paper sludges and residues like this, using on farmland as fertilizers. So there are nearly 200 incidents, at least in Germany, with these types of application. But today, I think we also talk about the new parameters of the Drinking Water Directive. So MEP Hansen mentioned it, and also Valentina Bertado. This group of substance is new in the Drinking Water Directive, which has been published December one year ago. At the very, very first time, WHO recommended to regulate PFOA and PFAS, but at the end of the day, it's really the whole group of substances. We are still waiting for the analytical methods to analyze the sum of PFAS of these 20 substances, but also the PFAS total. We are really still waiting for that. And on top of that, EFSA launched an opinion in autumn last year to say that at least some of these substances are even more harmful, and they really conclude and really recommend to take further action of these 4 substances. And then we are here in, yeah, they are really talking not about micrograms, they are talking about nanograms. So just to set the scene here. In the meantime, of course, we had a look about the occurrence, the possibilities and limits of water treatment. I think we can touch upon that a little bit later on. And to conclude this first question, we really think it's important that there's a change in paradigm. What we are doing at the moment is we are really looking back. We are reacting at a stage in time when we really identify and monitor the substances, and then look, do we put it on the list of priority substances or something like that? What we think from water industry point of view, that we should act right more at the very, very beginning. So control at source, stringent authorization. And this really brings me back to my initial point that we have to have a more deep look at the substance properties, especially when it comes to mobility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kastel-Exner, for your reply. And I'm very happy because I can see all speakers' interventions have sparked the interest of our audience, judging by the number of questions that we have started receiving through the Q&As box. So on this note, I would like to turn to Ms. Tatiana Santos and ask you, well, there's no doubt that we need to worry about PFAS. Do you think we have today the policy tools and the knowledge to abate this issue?
Yes, hello, good afternoon, and thank you first of all from the NGO side for inviting us for this discussion. So indeed, there are sufficient tools in place, in particular the new tools provided by the chemical strategy of promoting the generic risk management and grouping approaches. Also, the REACH authorization gives very important tools for considering PFAS as a substance of very high concern due to its persistency. For us, this should be considered as an equivalent level of concern, only a very persistency property. But PFAS pollution scandals are growing, as explained by the Commission before. We launched today, by the way, a video regarding the latest pollution scandal in Belgium. So if you are interested, please don't hesitate looking at our website. But why PFAS are so difficult to regulate is a good question, no? There is a large family, as was said before. Hundreds of PFAS are produced industrially in Europe. There are an estimation of 100,000 sites in Europe emitting PFAS into the environment. However, there is a general lack of information on the properties, volumes, uses, emissions. So this is due to non-compliant registration dossiers. There is a lack of registration obligation for many PFAS, in particular polymeric PFAS, and there is no standardized reporting obligation in Europe. So it's really difficult to know, what is going on with regard to PFAS manufacture and use. But on the other hand, I wanted to show you a bit an overview of the PFAS volumes, the uses and manufacture of PFAS. Sometimes the image is better to explain. So you see here the whole PFAS universe, and if you look at the pie, the gray zone, which is by far the largest volumes of PFAS in Europe, it's fluoropolymers and the monomers. So this is the reason why we believe it's extremely important to actually tackle fluoropolymers and go straight to the main problem. These are not only very highly produced, but its production is the origin of most of the PFAS pollution problems historically. So the problem is that they have not been tackled by regulators so far. And they should, of course. So the last problem is that, as it was raised before also by the Commission, is that the polluters don't pay and remediation costs are too high. So what do we think that needs to be done to really make the PFAS action strong in Europe? First of all, and probably the most important point, is to ensure that all PFAS and all uses are restricted. So the upcoming universal PFAS restriction is the best opportunity to tackle the PFAS pollution problem indeed, but it needs to ensure that all of them are part of the scope. If the EU leaves out the PFAS most widely manufactured and used, for example, fluoropolymers, the restriction will become close to meaningless. Second important point is that the derogations are restricted to the Montreal Protocol's essential uses concept. Third, extremely important to ensure the registration of all PFAS polymers. There is an ongoing process to oblige polymers to be registered, and many PFAS are polymers. So fluoropolymers, for example, should be also a part of these information requirements under REACH. And another important point is the application of the polluters pay principle. So the chemical companies pay for the remediation costs and indemnify the victims, but also they pay the cost of monitoring enforcement and focused health studies and exposed populations. There should be fees for derogations as well. And finally, the Environmental Liability Directive can have a very important role to apply the polluters pay principle, but it needs to amend some problems that we can discuss later if you wish. And another important aspect is to ensure proper scientific assessment. So we have independent and not biased scientists assessing the hazards of these chemicals, similar to what was done already with COVID crisis. So we believe this is something to learn from that. So I will leave it now for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Santos, for your intervention, also for your key policy recommendations, including, of course, the polluter pays principle, which I'm sure will be coming to this topic as well in the course of today's discussions. Just prior to that, I would also like to once again turn to Mr. Hansen and ask you, from your side, which do you think are the main challenges that the PFAS restriction process faces, and what would be needed from the different stakeholders in order to make that successful?
Thanks a lot, Elias. I think that the biggest challenge is the breadth, which is many substances, and the depth, which is a multiplicity of uses. So in our speak, simply the size. And of course, what we need and want is not to replicate the size of the restriction in that sense with the number of pages, but to make it concise, but sufficient scientific evidence to propose where action is needed and where action is not needed. So we are pretty sure that we'll manage our side of it en route, but there are a number of things that need to be done, what you mentioned in terms of prerequisites. or engagement of others. But let me first just say that I see a number of similarities in terms of scientific arguments, but also in terms of breadth with the microplastics restriction that we did, simply because the microplastics also covers many substances. So we've done it once, and we believe it's possible to do it again. The number of uses, though, is significantly larger, and already microplastics was big. But I'm pretty confident that we'll get the dossiers done, and that we'll be able to discuss them. In terms of other actors, well, if the approach that we currently are taking on the firefighting foams, and probably will end up taking when we finish the dossier and send it to our scientific committees in February, which is very much similar to what we did with microplastics, which is basically no data, no derogation. So very much of the approach that we need from industry, but also many other actors, is information. We need information up front in order to make the right decisions in the dossier, and in order to enable a good scientific discussion afterwards. The later information comes in, the less it can be discussed, so the less it will have a possibility to influence the outcome. And therefore, it's all about getting enough information up front as early as possible. And that's going to be a challenge for us to deal with, but of course also for other economic actors and players to come with the information that is usable for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen, for presenting us also from various stakeholders' point of view what would be needed with regards to making the current restriction process successful. And you touched upon information a lot. That's a very important element. So just on this note, I would like to turn to Mr. Robin as well and ask you, what do you think also the incentives would be that the plastic industry needs? Apart from perhaps the provision of information that we've just heard, what would be the incentives that the industry would need in order to step up innovation and develop safe by design alternatives? And would perhaps the allocation of the financial responsibility for the contamination of soil and water on PFAS producers be a fair incentive? What is your view on this?
Yeah, thank you, Elias, for this question. I mean, first of all, to reply to Mr. Hansen, I mean, you know, we have two consultations. We have also the consultant from the 5 member states. We not only participate as a trade association, we participate all members, but also I organize actually a seminar with Bauer and others to actually explain to our downstream user how important is it to reply. So I think the industry in general has been in this restriction, which is pretty important, very open, and we provide whatever we can provide all the time, including different reports and so on. So I think in terms of information, and I know discussing with the 5 member states, they are a little warm about all the information they receive. And I hope they will be able to process them and to use them. That is also another question. But to reply to you, Elias, obviously, as I said already, the fluoropolymers are irreplaceable in the production of a lot of innovation and a lot of critical, sustainable, and safe by design products, you know. And as I said, they are renewables. Obviously, they're providing optical transparency, isolation for photovoltaic panel, for fuel cell and battery. In electronic, as I said, you cannot do semiconductor with that. Medical equipment. In transportation, you know, we prolong only the life of component for performance, emission control, safety. And actually, you know, you have the Euro 6 and Euro 7 standard for road transport emission. And actually, it will be impossible to achieve them with without fluoropolymer. Now, obviously, colleagues, I mean, talk about fluoropolymer in a different way and what the industry is doing in the life cycle, okay? So we are a responsible manufacturing, and all the members of APG have committed to voluntary responsible manufacturing principle in terms of continuing improvement and developing best available technique in the manufacturing process, managing the environment emission, the development of R&D program for the advance of technology, allowing the replacement of PFAS-based polymerization aids whenever technical is feasible, the increasing of recyclability and the reuse of the products in the line of economy. So what, in terms of end of life, I mean, obviously the concern related to the disposal of PFAS at the final step of the life cycle is not typically related to fluoropolymer because the low degradability of potential of fluoropolymer under the environment conditions. So I heard, you know, bioaccumulative mobility, transport of PFAS before, but as I said, not all PFAS are the same. Please look at them in a science-based, grouping them, looking at their technical and physical differences property. What we're doing also, I mean, we collaborate now with our sister organization. We are engaged into a research project aiming to identify conditions required for proper disposal, incineration of fluoropolymer. And we would love to continue to work with the European Commission on this end of life. And obviously, and go concretely to see how, with the existing EU regulation on waste, we could that impact the end of life treatment of fluoropolymer. And as we are in a water, and we're discussing water today, I want to say something about a project we currently carrying. So we ask an independent survey commissioned by Rumble, who's pretty well known in the European area, about water emission. And what is the first conclusion of his work? That all FPG member company implement risk management measure for reducing PFAS in the water. And all the collection of emission and the analytical methodology are actually approved by national authority. So of course, it's depending on the site, it's depending on the process. So I can say we have general rules and various principles. So what are the principles? So the principle is technical filtration, physical or chemical, collection, treatment, and analysis of remaining PFAS in wastewater collection after treatment before release to the public water, collection, recovery of PFAS polarization aids, including reuse before water is released to public water, and PFAS monitoring with target and not targeted analysis method. So concretely, what does it mean? So the emissions are collected, the solid content is separate, either by precipitation or decanting or filtering, and the liquid is treated at the waste treatment plant, on-site or the municipal one, okay? And so it means the disposable to recover fluoropolymer product to avoid disposable. And as a part of the work we're doing now with Rumble in the context of the survey water emission, we're going to compare and analyze the risk management measure that the company are currently putting in place. And from this comparison, we will develop best practice methodology, analytic methodology, and we have a discussion how we can do it all together. And of course, it's a big principle of our responsible manufacturing guideline is obviously the information of the program will be monitored, will be evaluated. So the industry is doing its work in terms of manufacturing, in terms of use, and in terms of end of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robin. And actually, your intervention couldn't serve as a best bridge to our next speaker, once again, Dr. Castel-Exner. And Dr. Castel-Exner, I wanted to ask you, why is Euro actually insisting so much on control at source measures to address PFAS? One might wonder, for instance, wouldn't it be easier to tackle PFAS at waterworks and wastewater treatment plants?
Yes, thank you very much, Ilias, for this question. And one immediate reaction is that with the approach we are currently following, we are always too late. So the approach authorizing substances, doing immense comprehensive monitoring, identify then the substances, fill in huge databases, and then reacting by, for example, putting substances of emerging concern on the list of priority substances, we are really late. And what is really important is that especially, and I think Nicola, maybe this is really a common ground, because you're also asking for a scientific assessment and a scientific assessment on these substance priorities. And this is why we are supporting very much to look more on the mobility of the substances and to implement them in REACH. So this is one point. To move from this retrospective perspective more to a proactive perspective within a stringent authorization process. The next point is when it comes to regulation, and it has been mentioned several times that now in the new Drinking Water Directive, there are parametric values, and the member states, they will transpose them to limit values, and that there are also PFAS regulated. And that this regulation should take also into account the feasibility. So the feasibility for drinking water operators and wastewater operators to apply to these limit values. And this is really an important point. And we did quite recently a really comprehensive research study on that. So in Germany, as Ilya said, I'm working for DBGW, which is the German Technical and Scientific Association. And there is also the Technology Center in Karlsruhe. So our colleagues are doing quite a lot of research at TZW. And they had a look at the occurrence of PFAS substances in drinking water resources. But what they also did, and that was the major part of that research project, is they looked at the possibilities, but also at the limits of drinking water treatment. And when it comes to PFAS, we really have to say the removal efficiency depends very much on the chain length. So is it a short chain PFAS or is it a long chain PFAS? And especially the removal efficiency of short chain PFAS is rather poor, like TFA is a short chain and is not that best removed. You can remove it by activated carbon, but at the end of the day, it ends up in an 80% reduction of operation time. So you need lorries and lorries each day at the drinking water treatment works with new, fresh activated carbon. Yeah. So that's really not an option. And besides activated carbon, the second point of treatment is really membrane filtration with reverse osmosis. And I think I don't have to tell you that reverse osmosis is really the last technique in our toolbox. There is nothing else. So what we are doing with reverse osmosis is that we really create artificial water. And this goes along with enormous resources we need, enormous energy we need, which is absolutely not in line with the Green Deal and with the way of the water industry to become climate neutral. And it goes also along with these residues, because whatever we are doing in treatment, these substances, they're not gone. They are not fading away at the end of the day. They are in the residues. They are in the residuals. They are in the brine. So that the next point is really how to tackle, how to really handle these residue management. So another step where you have to discuss them with the competent authorities, where you have to get a permit or you don't get a permit. So quite frankly, with regards to PFAS treatment, we really have a tough problem, a really tough problem. And on top of this tough problem, we are not only facing the Drinking Water Directive parametric values, but also the new EFSA opinion, which, as I said, is really, then we are not talking about micrograms, we are really talking about nanograms. So this is to give you a small insight in the treatment potential. And this is why we are absolutely proactive as Euro, and we are really supporting the developments under the CLP revision, under the REACH, revision. We also look forward to an IED revision to address and report PFAS from industrial plants. And of course, it is a good step to pick up PFAS as a group in the priority list of substances under the Water Framework Directive. And with regards to what Tatjana, what you said on the Environmental Liability Directive, there is this very interesting report of the European Court of Auditors when they had a closer look at the polluter pays principle. And what really strikes me there is that they say the Environmental Liability Directive has really a weakness, a big weakness, because there's no proper definition of what an environmental damage is. And that is the reason why there are these, how can I say, these juridical cases about environmental damages really doesn't work. So my goodness, imagine. So there is no proper definition of an environmental damage. So just to add this. Thank you very much, Elias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kastel-Exner. And I've noticed that during your intervention, Ms. Santos had been nodding positively or in agreement with regards to your statement. So I would like to ask you, Tatjana, do you think that there is a risk that exemption from essential uses and derogation from socioeconomic analysis will water down the PFAS restriction, hampering PFAS control at source? And in your opinion, how should the essentiality concept be applied?
Yes, before I go into that, indeed, this is one of the shortcomings that I wanted to say regarding the Environmental Liability Directive. But now I come to your question, Elias. So in fact, this is actually one of the main loopholes of the current restrictions. Not only, it's not limited to PFAS, but all restrictions, because derogations are not properly justified and transparency or strict control measures are not imposed. So we fear that indeed the universal PFAS restriction will copy-paste this problem. And a wide scope of the universal restriction proposal is very important, particularly with regard to the PFAS that are more widely used and hence emitted into the environment. So we need to really tackle the PFAS that matter and actually are the cause of the main environmental problems. And this is, I wanted to insist, fluoropolymers is by far the biggest one in here. Regarding the essential uses concept, there is a lot of debate about what does it mean, and the only concept that exists and has been proven to be successful is actually the Montreal Protocol. So for us, it is clear that the essential uses concept has to be strictly applied based on the if not copied from the Montreal Protocol. So this means that only PFAS that contribute to societal well-being with regard to health and safety, this is contribute to health and environmental protection, and for which there are no safer alternatives, but not or, this is the only way that PFAS can be allowed. Then another aspect I wanted to mention is the derogations normally are time unlimited, and this is a very big problem because these derogations last forever and hampers green innovation. So it is very clear that any derogation which must be based on the Montreal Protocol should be time limited and regularly reviewed to check the availability of potentially new alternatives, for example, because the market is growing and evolving continuously. So we cannot assume that because today there is no alternative, there will never be. So this should be properly tracked. So we tend to talk about derogations, but for us, it is mainly transitional periods, what we need to really move away from the most harmful chemicals in general and PFAS in particular towards safer chemistries. And finally, derogations should be always, in any case, subject to limitations and obligations. So, for example, if a specific use of a chemical or a PFAS is derogated, there should be obligations to monitor, to report, to label, so there is transparency about where these chemicals are placed, consumer products, etc. Strict risk management measures should take place, and of course they should be linked to fees on volumes that are allowed, because this way we could also come back to the application of the polluters pay principle. Otherwise, the system is just not economically sustainable for the decision makers and the taxpayers. So the cost of PFAS pollution is so huge that it is the only way forward, that it doesn't make sense from the business perspective to actually pollute with PFAS.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank all panelists for their interventions today and also for such a rich debate. I would just like, as we have 5 more minutes until closing the panel discussion, I would just like to start by asking Mr. Hansen, what would be from your side the key takeaways for our audience? What would you like the audience to take home today?
Thank you very much, Elias. I think the big takeaway for me is that this is a huge project that needs a lot of information and needs a lot of discussion, but it's based on a very proven scientific technical track that does the preparatory work, and then there's a policy decision which is made in Brussels. And I think the track record there is that it works transparently, everybody gets heard, and in the end, a robust result comes up. I see a number of very specific questions that are arisen, and I just want to say, I'm not going to answer them here, but I definitely volunteer to give answers in writing so that the people typing in the questions won't have had those efforts for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Robin, perhaps what would be from your side the key takeaways of today's discussion?
Well, thank you, Elliot. I mean, a lot of takeaway. I mean, obviously, the example all of you gave, I mean, they're right, but you're confusing. It's a very confusing because you're confusing a lot of different PFASs. And again, I'm sorry, yes, fluoropolymer is probably maybe the larger group of PFASs, but it's a subgroup. It's a subgroup of PFASs. There are different subgroups of PFASs. And actually, this is recognized by different reports, by the Danish Environment Report of 2013, by the European Commission Wood Report by 2010. So please, when we're talking about PFASs, don't mix everything. I'm sorry, but the universal restriction doesn't make sense scientifically speaking. 2, we're talking about essential use. I'm sorry, but essential use for me, it's a very sociological, philosophical topic. I mean, our colleague Tatiana talked about well-being. What is the well-being and how is the innovation? I mean, I'm coming from an ancient time where we have no mobile phone. You know, now we're all working with mobile phone. Is an innovation? Do we need it? Is it well-being? But I'm sorry, you cannot have mobile phone without chip, without electronic, without fluoropolymer, without PFASs. You talk about also persistency, you know, everything is persistent. So persistency is not synonymous of hazard. I mean, I'm not a chemical, I'm an economist by background, but risk is function of hazard and exposure. So only to say that it's a restriction should be based on persistency will be completely new in the REACH process. And actually, we need product now to achieve the Green Deal who are durable, who are long-lasting. You know, so while also we don't see persistency as such helping to long-standing products so we don't have to change it every 5 years, every 6 months. And also the last point I want to make is exactly what Tatiana said. I mean, there is growing demand for fluoropolymer around the world for electronics and green technology. So if it's not going to be with the European industry, it's going to be without the European industry. It's going to be made in Asia, and they're going to have all this technology driving the productivity, and we will be obliged to buy them. So please, again, it's very complex. Look at the science, put the emotion down, and let's work together. I mean, we have discussion with Euro, and we'll be pleased to continue to have discussion with you to share when we be finished the work we're doing on water. But please, let's continue to discuss together. Don't look at immediately phasing out all the PFAS, because with some of the PFAS, you're not going to be able to reach the goal that EU want to reach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robin, and I couldn't help but reiterate your messages with regards to science-based policymaking. This is exactly what we stand for on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup, and of course, providing an open dialogue for more discussion when it comes to every subject, including, of course, PFAS. So, Dr. Castel-Exner, perhaps some takeaway thoughts from your side.
Yes, thank you very much, Ilias. I think it's absolutely clear that we really need a shift in paradigm. That means we need a controlled at source approach for these substances with really a stringent authorization, and having a look really at the substance properties. I think that's a really fair approach, and even consider more than in the past the mobility of substances, because as I said, the more mobile the substance is, the more likely it is that we find it in the water cycle. I think we should really be aware that end of pipe has tremendous limits, end of pipe treatment for drinking water or for wastewater, and tremendous impacts on delivering on the European Green Deal with all its objectives, strategies, and initiatives. And if contamination of surface or groundwater bodies occurs, really to reiterate the polluter pays principle, as it has been done by the European Court of Auditors just recently. And this should be applied, and the producers should cover the investments and operational costs through extended producer responsibility schemes. I think this is another additional point I would like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castel-Exner, and Ms. Santos, perhaps some takeaway thoughts from your side as well.
Yes, thank you. So for us, the main important takeaway is that the upcoming universal PFAS restriction is the best opportunity to tackle the PFAS pollution problem. So, but it needs to ensure that all PFAS are part of the scope and all uses as well. If it leaves out the PFAS most widely emitted into the environment, the restriction will become meaningless. So it is very important that the EU restricts the derogations linked to the Montreal Protocol's essential use concept. So PFAS that contribute to health and environmental protections for which no safer alternatives do exist are the only ones that are allowed. And this is linked to with your comment about what is well-being. I think there is a very clear definition in the Montreal Protocol. So let's not invent the wheel, just stick to what in practice is known to have worked very well. It's the very few examples we have where it worked very well. So let's not go beyond that. And regarding to the argument that there are so many different uses and properties than PFAS that they cannot be restricted altogether, indeed, we do support science-based, of course, but unfortunately, we are not talking about scientific emotions here. The problem is that all PFAS are persistent, and they accumulate to levels that eventually are in high risk to be toxic. particularly because evidence is so far showing that PFAS have many different toxicities. The large majority of PFAS are toxic, and very many are accounted in the EFSA's recent opinion, actually. So this is science. Multiple lines of evidence of accumulation, toxicity, mobility, difficulty to remediate in soil, in water, in materials, the cost of health and society. This is scientific evidence. So please don't misuse what it means, science, because actually the scientific evidence is what companies tend to deny. We are too used to hear denials. Even 3M company polluting in Belgium, if you look at their website, they keep saying that PFOA is not hazardous. I find this outrageous. This is scientific fraud. So please, let's be serious and let's talk science, but not the science that interests to some. Let's talk to the scientific evidence by independent scientists. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all speakers once again for your key takeaways. I'm sure that your contributions have really sparked the interest of our audience as well. So I would suggest that at this stage of the event, we can proceed with the Q&As part. So on a very brief explanation, attendees can send once again their questions in written via the Q&As box of the platform, and I will be reading them out loud for our excellent set of speakers for today. Does this sound all right for you? Yes? Okay, perfect. So then I would just like to start with the first question from our audience, which is, REACH goes across sectors. At the same time, there is already in place a number of vertical pieces of legislation which regulate particular products. Are these vertical pieces of legislation taken into account when approaching this REACH process for PFAS? Yes, Mr. Hansen.
I think since there's so many questions, I'll just answer this one with yes, they are. We assess the situation as it is on the market today with the risk management imposed by whatever legislation, but in making recommendations in terms of what risk management options could be taken by the Commission, we also consider what measures are in place, not yet implemented or coming under other pieces of legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen. Perhaps any other speaker that would like to take the floor? All right, we can proceed then to the next question to Ms. Bertato. Ms. Bertato mentioned the polluter pays principle. So the question would be, will producers pay when water treatment works have to install costly technologies to remove PFAS? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that the polluter pays principle was also partially addressed by Tatiana and Claudia during the discussion. But it is clear that, PFAS contamination is not really a good example of polluter pays principle. The contamination case in Italy that I mentioned was also mentioned by other speakers. Nobody paid for that. I mean, the public paid for that because the company went bankrupt. Other pollution cases are still what we call orphan sites, so nobody is responsible for them. But what we are trying to do is to evaluate and potentially review the Environmental Liability Directive. I mean, some of the drawbacks were also already mentioned. And there we have a clear commitment in the recently adopted soil strategy to look also at the definition of land damage and the role of financial security to ensure that if a land is used, then if there is pollution happening, there is then financial availability to remediate. So it is not working as intended, but we are trying to address the drawbacks, and we hope that with this review of the Environmental Liability Directive in future, we will really be able to apply better the polluter pays principle.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bertato. And I would just like to step in with a follow-up question to Dr. Kastel-Exner and Tatiana, perhaps, because we've seen that PFAS find a way, when they do find a way to water resources, they're nearly impossible to remove. So who do you think should take the burden of the remediation of existing PFAS pollution?
Yes, as I said before, so the polluter pays principle, and I think this is one really major principle of the European Treaty. So it's enshrined in the treaty, and I was really disappointing to read in the European Court of Auditors report that it seemed to be so hardly to be applied, and that it really become a reality. And so if we're talking about polluter pays principle or producer responsibility, extended producer responsibility, yeah, that's of course a principle that should be applied. And as Valentina pointed out, the shortcomings and really the weaknesses of the Environmental Liability Directive, they really should be taken up very quickly, very quickly, because otherwise we really have no means. So. Yeah, Tatiana.
Yes, just to complement, because I fully agree with you. Indeed, it does not make sense from the economic perspective that it's other than the companies that are getting economic profit from manufacturing and using these chemicals. So it has to be the cost of remediation cannot be higher than the benefits, and if that is the case, that should go back to the origin of the problem, which is the manufacturers in the first place and users. But I wanted to use this time to actually brought you to the other gap of the Environmental Liability Directive, because I think it's very relevant as well. So Article 8.4 states that the government has the possibility to bear any remediation or reparation costs of the emissions were not breaching, when these emissions were not breaching permits. So unfortunately, what we have experienced in Europe so far is in most cases, these emissions were legal because the governments allowed these companies to emit PFAS. So this is extremely important that is also changed, because otherwise, in most of the cases, polluters will not pay. So it is very important to make the application of this principle right, to be really efficient and to really place the economic burden on PFAS pollution at source.
And one additional point, Elias, when we talk about the polluter pays principle, we also have to take into consideration the very first principle, which is the precautionary principle. Yeah. And remember the hierarchy in the Zero Pollution Action Plan. There is this hierarchy saying, first of all, there has to be to prevent pollution, to avoid prevention. And so I really would like to put really 3 exclamation marks. So the precautionary principle and the Zero Pollution Action Plan, they should be really in the center point of actions.
And if I could add, I think this is extremely important what you just mentioned, because the goal of the precautionary principle and the polluters pay principle together should be to prevent exposure to harmful chemicals. So how to make the polluters pay principle a tool to effectively prevent pollution, indeed. So that's why it's extremely important in our view.
Thank you very much. And I say yes, Mr. Robin, yes.
Yeah, Elias, I mean, first of all, I mean, I cannot talk, as I said, about all PFAS, let's be clear. So I'm talking on behalf of my members. Though they are fluoropolymer manufacturers. One, they are not irresponsible. You know, they are not manufacturing in a responsible way. look, surf on their website, and you will see how many investment they're doing in terms of controlling their emission. Two, as I said, as a trade association, we work together through responsible manufacturing guiding principle. We are not only principle because they are going to be implemented by the company, but also we're working, as I said, with different organizations to see how we can continue to work together on the direction of controlling the emission. So please also, again, I'm sorry, but look at also what is being done. You know, and also we're working on a different scientific study. And again, I know that some of you criticize the fact that they're coming from the industry, but they will be open. You know, we're working for the last 2 years on this polymer of low concern study. You will have it. You can look at all the methodology. Hopefully it's going to be published in February. You're going to have all the fluoropolymer, or most of them, and then we can discuss it. I'm not a scientific. I'll let the scientific discuss that. When we're doing now a study around incineration, again, we know that we have condition of incineration. We continue to study. We're studying with independent study. Again, I'm not a scientist. Let the scientists discuss, you know, and it's not because it's coming from the industry is bad science or is oriented science. Science is science. And as before the meeting, we're discussing about science. Obviously, there are the dot and the question about science, but let the scientific discuss the science. So don't think that the industry just sit back and said, whatever is happening, business as usual, let's wait 10 years before something happening. No, at least the fluoropolymer manufacturing are very active on the whole life cycle of our product. We understand the concern of the stakeholder in general. We're working towards it. Do we have all the reply right now? No. Are we going to have all the reply before July? I don't think so. But we will continue to work and we will continue to provide all the open information to the stakeholder and to the 5 member states. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Bertato, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I would like just to say on this issue of distinguishing the fluoropolymers from the other PFAS. I mean, we understand very well the difference between fluoropolymers, fluorinated polymers, and non-polymeric PFAS. The fact of the polymer of low concern, we understand that as well. The point is that the industry is very often focusing on the use phase to demonstrate that the polymer is of low concern. But what about the production? What about the end of life? I mean, the fluoropolymers, they are manufacturing using the PFAS that contaminated the water and soil in Italy, that contaminated water in the Netherlands. So if you just look at one part of the life cycle, you don't address all the issues. And I said it very clearly. So the universal PFAS restriction will look at all the life cycle. And for this reason, it makes perfect sense to include all PFAS, including the fluoropolymers in the assessment. Then let's discuss about potential derogation, the uses that are needed for the Green Deal, whatever. But in our view, it makes perfect sense to include the fluoropolymers as well.
I'm sorry if you can reply to Mrs. Bertano. I never said we have to, it's just what I said before. I'm sorry if I didn't express myself well. The fluoropolymer manufacturing are looking at the whole cycle of its product. We're working on the phase use with the PLC. We're working on the manufacturing with the approved guidelines for responsible manufacturing. Each of our members now looking at how they already apply it, how they can apply it. We're working all together to see what can be done. And then the end of life, as I said also in my statement, we're working with our colleague from the US and we're working the incineration. So I totally agree with you. Let's assess the fluoropolymer. We put on the table different study. We're working on all our cycle, not only the phase use. Be sure of that. And again, at the end of the process, assess what we're going to provide you, what we did provide you already in the different consultation, in the discussion we had also with the consultant of the 5 member states a year ago. So again, we open, we provide information as a trade association, and because of a competition rule, also each of our members, believe me, contribute widely with all the information they can provide, with all the data, and also with all the study they are aware of. And I hope the Commission and the 5 member states will assess everything we provide them. We are open, we continue to be open in the discussion, and we will continue to provide information is needed. Tell us what you want, and we try to provide what we have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robin. Perhaps if time would allow, I would like to just maybe take one more question, which would be with regards to the ongoing revisions of CLP, standing for the regulation on the classification, labeling, and packaging of chemical substances and mixtures, but also REACH, so the EU regulation on the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. So the question is, how could those revisions, including new hazard classes and group approach, affect the PFAS restriction process? Perhaps, yes, Tatiana.
Well, I was hoping Bjorn was the first one, but I can just maybe emphasize the importance of the revision of the polymers registration provision, because registration is the very first step, is the pillar of REACH. REACH works based on information, safety information, but not only properties, volumes, uses of chemicals in Europe. And on that base, the authorities are able to regulate and control them. However, polymers, including PFAS polymers, are exempted from this obligation. So there is a very important opportunity now that, in fact, the governments will have a basis for being able controlling the risks, and polymers, all polymers should be registered in our view, and provide at least basic information, so we can have a real picture on, okay, what are these chemicals, how much they are being manufactured and used, where. That's the basics. And then we also need, of course, information on the hazards that would allow, at least for the highest volumes, to learn more about potential concerns.
Thank you very much. Yes, I say that Dr. Castel-Exner and Ms. Bertato would like to take the floor.
Ms. Bertato first, please.
Okay, I can be very brief. I understood part of the question was concerning also CLP, the regulation for classification and labeling. So you know that we are reviewing REACH, we are also reviewing CLP, and one of the key actions that is very important also for PFAS, and an action that is explained in the chemical strategy, is the Commission intention to propose new hazard classes to address persistent mobile and bioaccumulative chemicals. So especially the P, persistent, and M, mobile classes are going to be very important to address substances that present a similar concern to PFAS. And on the top of that, we will also introduce PMT and VPVM, very persistent and very mobile, as a new category for identification of substances of very high concern. For the group, I think there was also part of the question on grouping for CLP, for classification. Yes, indeed, this is being discussed. So it might be that in addition to grouping in restrictions, in the future, we could have also a group of proposals for CLP.
Yeah. And maybe in addition to what has been said, as you're aware, we are absolutely supportive for these new hazard classes, and we really think that is a milestone, because then the CLP is very, very closely linked to REACH, but also to the other chemicals legislation, if I understand that correctly. So also to the pesticide regulation, the biocide regulation. So this this setting of this new hazard class has directly impacts on the authorization of different groups of chemicals, and and that is really foresighted, and we absolutely support that. And one last point to Nicola. I see your point to tell us there is studies ongoing. We are aware of that concern, but quite frankly, from the point of view of the water industry, it is really a burning issue, and we don't have that time. So as I told you, our toolbox is so much limited when we talk about PFAS, and we are really now facing these really stringent parametric values. And there is, of course, a small transition time in national transposition. But for example, in Germany, the German regulator and legislator says there won't be any long transition time. So for us, it is really a burning issue, and time is running. We really don't have time for waiting for studies and to talk.
Thank you very much. And yes, Mr. Hansen, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Just very shortly, it's of course not us to develop policy. That's why I didn't want to take the floor on REACH and CLP 2.0. We just advise the Commission where they want to, so we can, whether or not there's a registration on polymers, I mean, that's the Commission's decision, whether they want to do that, and then Parliament Council. We give advice on whether the way they design it would meet the policy objectives that they're setting for it. But you know, it's not us to talk about REACH 2.0 or CLP 2.0. What I can say is that the restriction on PFAS that we are working on and that we're working with member states on is fully possible to do under the current legislation. So of course, some of these improvements in terms of criteria and stuff like that can increase efficiencies and increase consistencies across legislation and all sorts of things like that. But I think I just wanted to take the floor to say, to look at essential use under the PFAS restriction under REACH is perfectly possible, because ultimately we don't in ECA say that a substance should, be restricted or not. We don't say that there should be an exemption or not. We provide assessments of all of that, and it's a policy choice whether or not a restriction is done or whether or not an exemption is granted. The only conditionality that is there for policy is that we have identified a risk, and then the choice of what is essential use or not is also possible based on the information that we will be giving the Commission to make that decision. And I think that that's just not to create panic that we need to get REACH 2.0 in place in order to do a proper science-based work on restricting all the PFAS chemistries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank all speakers for your contribution to today's event. I wish we had more time to continue the discussion, but on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, I think that definitely we will have more opportunities to approach this subject again, also in 2022. So on this note, I would like to thank you very much for your interventions and provide the floor to Ms. Marike Schouten on behalf of the Committee of the Regions for her closing remarks. Ms. Schouten is the Alderman at the municipality of Nijmegen and rapporteur of the Committee of the Regions opinion on the EU action plan towards zero pollution for air, water and soil. And within the Committee of the Regions, of course, Ms. Schouten is part of the Commission for COTER, so territorial cohesion policy and EU budget, but also ENVE, touching upon topics of environment, climate change and energy. So Ms. Schouten, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today. And I leave the closing remarks to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elias. And a big thank you also to the panelists. And listening to what everybody was saying, and also bearing in mind how the discussion went last week in the ENVI Commission on the opinion, was one line from a song that came into my mind time and time again. It is a line from Alanis Morissette. Is it not ironic? It's quite an old song, but still relevant, I believe. And many of you might know it, and it runs like, and isn't not ironic, don't you think? And I'm leaving out some words. So for my own purpose, I have to say, it's the good advice that you just didn't take, and who would have thought it figures? I think it's still highly relevant, that line, and perhaps other parts of the song as well. And it really also illustrates the dilemma that we have. The irony for me is PFAS also brought us a lot of good. So we thought. I think there is so many products that we use that have PFAS in it, and we are still using in the day-to-day lives. But we also really know nowadays that it is a very hazardous substance and also has lots of negative effects. And the European Environment Agency, amongst others, has been very clear about that. I have to be careful that I don't repeat things that have been said already. But one thing is for sure, we do have an awful lot of different PFAS substances, and do a comprehensive environmental monitoring and understand exposure of all of these different substances is extremely lengthy and will take a lot of time. And if I listen to some of you, I'm not so sure whether we do have the time. The EU action plan towards zero pollution by 2050 it basically says by 2050 no hazardous substances anymore, and that seems a long time away, 2050, but it isn't. It is really not that far away, 2050. And in our opinion, so I mean the opinion that we wrote for the Committee of the Regions, we stressed a few things that I would like to repeat, and you have mentioned them several times. It is preventing pollution to happen, so a very strong source approach, also on PFAS. Polluter should pay principle, and I have listened to some of the challenges in regards to PFAS, and the precautionary principle. These three things are really important, and we shouldn't take lightly. So in my opinion, of our opinion, we have again emphasized these three important principles, and that really faces us with quite a few challenges. I'm part of a subnational government, and not so long ago I was faced with a PFAS, I would nearly say outbreak, because it felt like an outbreak. We were really faced with exceeding the limits that were allowed, and it meant putting a stop to lots of building projects. It had severe implications of the day-to-day working in a local government. And I'm not even talking about health hazards. I'm really talking about what it means when you notice, okay, now we do have a problem. And in our case, we can really bring it back to one of the big chemical industries not far away from where I live. So we are really talking about something that's very important. And as local authorities, we do face a few problems when we have to address PFAS-related problems. The complex causes, conflicting interests, and the gap between policy and practice. And I think they have all come out in the discussions that we had by the panelists. But it is not like we don't have any perspective. We do. I do honestly believe that. I've heard it from you, from the panelists as well. What we need on a local level, on a subnational level, is a much better cooperation between authorities. It's vital. We need stronger administrative and compliance mechanisms, very important. And we need access to data and knowledge. And I think that's the one thing that we all say here, regardless from which position that we talk, and that's science and data. I think you all might be aware that there is going to be a zero pollution stakeholders platform that will bring together both science, practice, and maybe also industry. So I will actually use this opportunity to bring that to your attention. It is launched on the 16th of December. And that should really help us. It's very important, help us, meaning from practitioners to scientists to policymakers, to do the right thing. So thank you very much. And again, I really have heard again the challenges, but also perhaps the way forward. And that I find meaningful and also hopeful. It requires a huge paradigm shift, I believe, from the industry to be innovative and maybe not to be too afraid, from us as policymakers. Also, don't be too scared to make decisions that perhaps might hurt for one, but are meaningful and good for others. So I would say thank you very much, and there is a way forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schouten, for providing the event's summary remarks so very much to the point. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Hansen, MEP Mr. Hansen, for kindly hosting today's event under the umbrella of the Intergroup, but also a warm thanks goes out to our excellent set of speakers and viewers of this webinar. To engage, we are specifically looking at challenges and solutions ahead. So as we are wrapping up today's discussion, on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, I'm looking forward to continuing the debate in the future. I'm sure we will have more opportunities ahead. So until then, take care. Once again, thank you very much for being part, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Elias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a